Edmonton, Alberta played host to a very intriguing UFC fight night. In the main event, it was Brandon Moreno with a unanimous decision win over Amir Albazi, while Erin Blanchfield got back into the win column with a victory over Rose Namajunas in the co-main event. Let's start at the top. Brandon Moreno, excellent. Just a really, really strong all-around showing. I thought early on, it was one of those fights that we talked about where early on, one of the fighters picks up that range. And in this one, it was Moreno. And I thought he had a very good sense of the range. I thought that he was very quick defensively, like he was blocking a lot of the jabs that were coming. And then his footwork was fantastic as well to get out of the way of a few of the kicks. And initially, it was just kind of one big shot over the top, that big overhand right that Moreno was landing. But then it had a jab coming first, and then the right over the top, and then it was finishing with the kick. He did a really good job of kind of implementing a little bit more and mixing in a little bit more as he got more comfortable in that range. And it's one of the things we talked about in his fight against Royval, where Brandon Royval figured out the range, was able to get inside, and Moreno didn't really have an answer for that. And I thought that Moreno did a good job of mixing up his strikes as this fight went along, so that Albazi didn't really have a whole lot to kind of time and to counter off of. And so he was just a little bit off the whole fight. And again, the speed was there. He had a good mix of that volume, but also the power shots were landing. And then his wrestling defense was strong in keeping this fight standing. And that was a really big key as this fight went into the later and later rounds, is that Moreno was able to dictate the pace this fight was at and where this fight was taking place the whole way. Even when Albazi was coming forward, it was not in a way that was overly threatening to Brandon Moreno because of, again, the volume and the power that Moreno was able to land with. And so this was, again, a very good all-around showing from Brandon Moreno, and shows the high level that he can compete at in a number of different facets of the sport that makes him such a dangerous fighter. I just don't know where he goes from here now. And I don't know what the UFC does with him. He's lost to the champ, and he's lost to the guy who is right now is listed as the number one contender in the rankings, who has also then lost to the champ. And not only has he lost to the champ, he's lost to the champ twice. So, he's lost to the number one contender twice. So that becomes a bit of a problem as well. No, he's lost to Pantoja twice, sorry. It's Royval, who he's 1-1 with. Either way, it's a lot of losing to guys who are right at the top. So it's tough to just be like, oh yeah, no, just get another title shot. That's fine. I don't think that's how this is going to play out. So I'm interested to see what is next for Moreno, coming off of a very strong showing. For Albazi, he just couldn't get it going. You could see in this fight, he is a very good technical fighter. Like his boxing technique is really, really sharp. And when it kind of got going a little bit, it was actually quite impressive. It's just, he could never figure out the timing, he could never figure out the power, and he could never figure out that speed. Like, just all of it seemed to really be throwing him off in this fight, and he just couldn't really get this thing in gear and start to dictate his pace and get inside and start to fight the fight that he wanted to. They were mentioning on the broadcast that this is his first time back after some heart issues. I do think he gets back into a rhythm. I think that the technique and everything is there. He is a very talented fighter. I do think that he will bounce back. This was a tough night, but this was, I think, a good learning experience for him to get those 5 rounds against someone who was bringing that type of a style against him. And now how do you kind of counteract that going forward? So I do think Albazi will be back. I don't think there's a huge panic with him there necessarily. In the co-main event, Rose Namajunas loses to Erin Blanchfield by unanimous decision there as well. And I thought Rose kind of just ran out of steam. I loved how she looked in the first 2 rounds of this fight. Her movement was tremendous. Her hand speed was brilliant. And it was letting her beat Erin Blanchfield to the punch. Anytime Blanchfield came in, it was just like, it was a quick 1-2. Or she tries to come in with a kick, and it's just a nice little step. And she got that like Dominic Cruz kind of movement going on with her. That was making it really difficult for Blanchfield to get any kind of a grasp on her at all. And so Rose was styling through 2 rounds, but then a takedown from Blanchfield in the third really shifted things. Blanchfield didn't get a whole lot of offense off of that takedown, but it did win her the 3rd round. And then after that, Rose was just a little bit of a step slower. And so much of the advantage she had in the first 2 rounds was based off of that speed, that after that, Blanchfield was able to get inside and land her shots and not eat the counters that she was eating before, and she was also able to get inside and try for her takedowns. And her shot's not awesome, but she was still able to really start to control that fight. And in the end, Rose just couldn't keep Erin off of her and ended up... I have in my notes started to get picked apart. That's not necessarily how it was, but she was getting hit way more, and just the punches didn't really have the same speed or the velocity coming back at them. And so Erin Blanchfield was able to really start to get comfortable, and she started to dictate how the fight was going, and Rose just couldn't flip that momentum again in the later rounds. It all comes down to the fourth round, which was a very, very close round. And so this isn't like Rose just was all of a sudden a heavyweight in the fifth round and was dragging knuckles and stuff like that. Like, she was still competitive in these fights, but it was a night and day difference after that takedown that allowed Blanchfield to come in and steal the win. And for Blanchfield, I love how she battled back. From a technical standpoint or whatever, I didn't see anything in this fight that was like, okay, Fiorot and the rest of this division, watch out, because here comes Blanchfield. She is obviously well-rounded and really comfortable on the ground. But the stand-up is fine, but you have seen, like, that was 2 rounds of Namajunas, who I would say is an advanced striker, giving her some problems. And Fiorot before that, an advanced striker, given how effective that jab can be because of her reach, gave her some problems. I do still think advanced strikers are going to give her problems, but that we're talking about the top 2 or 3 fighters in the division. The part of the game that I was really impressed by, I know that was a lot of criticism before we got to, by the way, I was impressed, but the thing that I liked was I thought she showed up with the appropriate amount of urgency and really battled after getting picked apart in those first 2 rounds. We have seen a lot of fighters where it becomes deflating and it's like, okay, well, this is just target practice and I'm just going to get punched a lot and walk away with my 80 grand or whatever it was. She didn't do that. She came out in that 3rd round with an urgency. She pressed Rose Namajunas, was able to get the takedown, and was able to kind of change the fight that way. She was not happy with how the story of that fight was being written, and she changed it with one big move, and that allowed her to really start to build that momentum. And so credit to her in a round that she needed to have, because after the 2nd round, it was clear that she needed to win 3, 4, and 5 to get that victory. And she came out with the urgency that she needed in that. And that is something we don't see from a lot of fighters, is kind of recognizing, like, look, this is it, man. So you got to go. And she did it, and she was great. In terms of what's next, like, if this is a 3-round fight, we're talking about Rose as a title threat, because the first 2 rounds she looked excellent, and then the 3rd, okay, it's a takedown, but you don't get a whole lot with it. Rose still comes away with a win, and we're saying, like, Rose is back, title shot now. And so I don't think you can drop her too far down the rankings, and I don't think you can drop her too far out of title contention, although much like Moreno early on, we're now starting to stack contenders ahead of her who have also beaten her. And so that is kind of setting her back a little bit. But I do think that this is it's a tough loss, and it's one that she's going to be very frustrated by, but I do think it's one that she can bounce back from. For Blanchfield, I do still think the best strikers in this division give her problems, but this win gets her right back into that title mix now. And I think it's really exciting to see what comes up in this division in 2025. That's it for the UFC.